But why you're here is for this very special program, and I'm honored to introduce Eden Lepucki, the New York Times best-selling author of the novels California and Woman Number 17. Lepucki's work has been published in the Los Angeles Times, McSweeney's Quarterly Concern, Esquire, the New York Times Magazine, and The Cut, among others. Today, she'll be talking about her latest novel, Time's Mouth, which was longlisted for the Joyce Carol Oates Prize. Pong Shepard is the best-selling, award-winning author of The Cartographers and the Book of M. Her novels have been featured in the New York Times and the Los Angeles Times and on Good Morning America, and they have been translated into more than 10 languages. Her work has been optioned for television and film, and her latest novel is titled All This and More. They're in conversation today with S. Kirk Walsh, the author of the best-selling novel, The Elephant of Belfast, and she writes for the New York Times Book Review, Texas Highways, and elsewhere. Walsh is also the founder of Austin Bat Cave, a nonprofit that provides free writing workshops for students in the greater Austin area. Currently, she is at work on a second novel about Detroit during the summer of 1943. Enjoy the festival, and let's welcome the program.
Thank you, everyone, for being here today. And yeah, it's just awesome to see such a wonderful turnout for the celebration of books and authors and reading. So yeah, I just am honored to be here. So thank you, and thank you to all the staff of the National Book Festival. So before I move into my questions, I'm just going to do two, in case people haven't read our authors' books yet, just to give you a little context for our conversation. So first we'll start with Pong Shepard. All This and More is an inventive new novel about a woman who wins the chance to go back in time and fix her biggest mistakes to create the life she always dreamed of and lights things on fire. But when things start to go wrong in her perfectly crafted new future, and she discovers signs that someone else may be trying to tamper with her faith, she must decide just how far she'll go to get her happily ever after, or risk losing it all. And Time's Mouth follows an orphan who becomes a leader of a remote cult of mamas in Northern California, and then unfolds into an expansive, multi-generational narrative about motherhood, time-traveling women, trauma, abandonment, and haunting questions about what we leave behind and what stays with us, and what is passed from one generation to the next. Traveling outside the margins of traditional narrative, both of these novels are wildly imaginative in how the authors animate and explore the time-space continuum, the myriad possibilities and the consequences of roads taken and roads not taken. So, yeah, both of these books, as you know from the title of the panel, deal with time travel. And I just wanted to kind of begin our conversation kind of talking about the origins of the novels. But it seems like a fairly common human desire to either want to relive or rewrite the past somehow, to either erase or in some cases understand one's pain. And I just wanted to, if you could talk about why you centered your novels on this idea or desire.
Do we? Oh, are we? I have to go first.
I have to go first. Go in whatever order. No order.
Well, I don't know. Do you want to start us off, or should I?
Okay, I'll do it. I always joke that if I could had a time machine, I would go there. I would step inside, and I would go to the self that thought that a time travel novel was a good idea, and I'd say,
Oh, that's a good answer.
it's going to be a lot harder than you think it is. But I wanted to write a book about this precisely as you said, Kirk. I had you know, once I got enough years under my belt, I started to really long for moments of my past. And the moment that felt the most kind of delicious and unreachable was the first moments with all of my children. But when I started it, I had 2, and when I finished it, I had 3 kids. But that first moment of when you hold that tiny little being. And when I first got pregnant, I had a friend who said, you know, I don't want to relive my kids' lives. Like, they're in their 20s now. I did a great job. It's over. Whew. And it's, you know, it's ongoing. But he said, if I could have just like 10 minutes with my son when he was 5, I would give anything for that. And at the time, I didn't understand that. But after I had my kids and they grew up, and now my oldest one is 13 and my youngest one is 5, I understood that longing. So I really wanted to explore that on the page. It's kind of wish fulfillment. Obviously I can't time travel to my past. I can't go back to college. I can't go back to these little moments. But I wanted to explore the fictive possibilities of that.
Yeah. I think I like that you said wish fulfillment, because I think All This and More was a little bit of that too. And I think it like really started in earnest for me. Sorry, I can tell that as I look between both of you, I'm just like changing the amount of microphone that's, yeah. So I really started to think about the novel in earnest basically right when lockdown started, when the COVID pandemic started. And we all went from, you know, the world was just 24/7 race to a standstill overnight. And we were all in our houses, just like waiting. And I think at that point, for a lot of us, it was really hard not to like ask yourself, am I happy with how, because before you were too busy, right? We were all too busy to ask that question. And then we suddenly had a couple weeks or a couple months of just, you know, having nothing to think about but the choices that we had made so far and where it had brought us to today. And so I started thinking of kind of like a magic reset button. I think a lot of us had that feeling too, of like, if only there were a button I could just push, we could go back a little bit and everything would be better, right? So we surely would do a much better job the second time around. And that is how the idea of this game show, which is the vehicle through which my character is able to go back in time and revisit her past decisions. She gets put on a game show that can send her back to very important moments in her life. And I just started to think, what would I change about my own life? And I'm going on and on, but yes. So it was kind of born out of. I don't want to say it was born out of the pandemic, but it's not a pandemic book in that it is not about the pandemic. The pandemic doesn't happen in the book, but I think it's got a lot of very relatable feelings, because we were all, I think a lot of us were feeling those sort of things and questioning where we were in life. Were we happy with the things we had done so far? Are there ways that we should change? Should we even change things? Or maybe we should just go outside for 5 minutes, stand in the grass, then come back inside and like Zoom a friend with some wine, you know, rather than blowing up our lives and, you know, moving cities or changing jobs. So that's kind of how it came to be.
Well, I think kind of a common phrase that we heard during the pandemic was about the pivots, people making pivot decisions. And it's interesting, in your book, obviously there's a lot of different pivots.
Yes, yeah.
And one thing that I was struck by, and maybe just the notion of the human impulse to want to relive moments, that it kind of starts in both your books somewhat innocently, but then it almost becomes something seductive, almost addictive, in terms of where it leads your characters. And I wondered if that was something you were thinking about in terms of that it can kind of begin as something positive, but then sort of swing into a darker corner, say, of the story.
I think so, right? Because if somebody gave you the power to go back and change things about your life, I think it would be totally terrifying to make the first choice. It'd be so terrifying. And then it would be really, really scary to make the second choice, and then kind of scary to make the third choice. And then eventually it would get to the point where you probably would be changing things that you didn't even need to change just to be changing. It'd be very hard to not be drunk on that power. And at least in All This and More, that is part of what is happening to the main character. In the beginning, the question really is like, what are the really big regrets I have that I would redo if I could? And by the end, the question is sort of, how far is too far?
Time's Mouth was the first book that I wrote that I wanted to have a protagonist and an antagonist. I thought, would it be fun to try sort of a classic storytelling technique? Originally, the book started with my protagonist. And when I went to edit it, we decided, my editor and I thought, wouldn't it be interesting if you can you tell a time travel novel chronologically? So let's start with, ultimately, the villain of the novel. And at the opening of the novel, Ursa, who goes on to start an all-female cult in the woods of Santa Cruz, these women come around her and watch her time travel and feel kind of euphoric around her. But when she first learns that she has this gift, she's just a teenage girl in Connecticut, and ultimately she runs away to San Francisco, and she doesn't know anyone. And it was interesting, I had written so much of the book when I decided to start the book chronologically and start with her kind of origin story. And what I realized was, yes, at first, she ultimately goes on to abuse her powers, as I think, I don't want to say anyone would, but many of us would. But at the beginning, she's just a lonely, scared girl who's suffered a lot, and the feeling that she gets when she can access these moments gives her some sense of agency in the world, and she's able to connect with these other women because of it. And she doesn't realize exactly what the consequences will be. And so it's very important to me to have the reader access that first so that you could kind of connect or empathize with her, and as you watch her kind of fall farther away from goodness.
And was it, just thinking about an antagonist, villain character, like, was it hard to write knowing that she's kind of going to become an unlikable character? And I guess in your novel, Ren might be kind of that, contrary, unexpected character. But yeah, just I think sometimes in literature, there's always comes this question of the unlikable character and how, I think both of them really come to life in their contradictions. I mean,
I always bristle at the idea of an unlikable character because I think I also really love to read an unlikable character. The only thing I require of my characters when I'm reading is that they're interesting to me. So I don't need to have a beer with them. I just want to be intrigued and compelled by what they're doing. But in this case, I was thinking, well, and I have written characters that I thought were perfectly likable that many readers hated. So I don't know what that says about me, but in this case with an antagonist or a villain, I had to think about, like, what does that mean? It's not likability, unlikability, and what I came to is that a villain is somebody who knows that they've done something wrong and does not change. And that was really useful for me because I actually really loved writing Ursa. Again, I don't know what this says about me, but I didn't have any trouble kind of accessing her or writing her voice, or her selfishness or her viciousness was kind of fun to write. And I could tap into it because I think we all can tap into those parts of ourselves. But it was a little bit difficult to come to the understanding of, like, oh, this is the moment when she realizes all the things that she's done wrong and she's still going to keep doing those bad things. That was harder for me to get to.
I sometimes find that moment, though, that villains have, like, especially relatable, though, because I think the thing about a really good villain is when they really, because all villains want something. And if the story is being told right, you really feel that want to, and it makes sense to you. Because usually what a villain wants, if it's a good villain, it's something that probably you want too. And you might not go as far as they would, but we all understand that want.
Yeah.
And so I think when they hit that moment, if it's a good villain and they decide not to stop, to keep going, it's almost like what we wish that we could do ourselves, you know, if we were less kind or more brave or something like that. So I don't know, I often don't think characters are too unlikable either, and I think I especially like a good villain because there's just something really, you can really identify with the want of a villain in a way that sometimes you can't with the hero, because the hero is more focused on what is right and what is good, and the villain is all just desire.
Yeah, that's a good reading.
Do you, when you were both writing these books, did you ever have like a favorite villain from another novel that you were thinking about to kind of be your not inspiration, but just sort of like possibility?
That's a good question.
I'm coming up empty.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think a lot. Well, I really like Victor LaValle's The Changeling.
That's
Oh, yeah.
a great book.
Yeah. Yeah. But I think the blank might be just because the characters are dimensional. You know, they're not one thing.
Yeah.
So.
When I have this composition book from graduate school that has like things I wrote down, many of them unattributed. One of the things that's in that book is voice is the amalgamation of books read, which I just love. This idea of everything you read, whether you liked it or you didn't, kind of enters your writerly DNA. And so I think there's some of that there, of every single villain I've ever read obviously informed the book. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I've been asked, like, who would you want to play this role in the movie? And I'm like, well, this is a real person, so I don't know who's going to play them. Like, when I'm writing a book, they are real people to me that I've thought about so long in a sort of a deep level of, like, what their consciousness and their longings. So I don't usually have an inspiration of somebody fictional or real, because they exist. It's almost like, who would play your mother in a movie? You're like, how much time do you have?
Well, I think there's probably some writers in the audience, and I think for me, when I was reading your books, what I was really impressed by was kind of the rules of the time travel. They're quite different from each other, but also kind of like the world building, like both are very convincing. And like, was it something that you like kind of gave yourself parameters when you first started drafting, or did the rules of the world kind of present themselves through the revision process? Because I think that's one of the hardest things with speculative fiction, and the kind of time travel that your characters are doing, I've never experienced myself. Like, they're so imaginative.
I think in my case, it was great to have such a good editor, because when I started, as I said before, so All This and More, it's about a woman who gets to go back in time and she gets to change her past, and she does it through this game show. And so in the beginning, I was really excited by the idea and of being able to allow readers to like jump between paths, and you help choose what she chooses, and that can change the story based on your options. And so I think I turned in like a 700-page first draft to my editor, and it had like 150 choices that you could make as the reader about how Marsh changed her life and where she would end up. And my editor was just like, no, like, no.
And how did you take that news?
She was so right. I mean, I have a really good relationship with my editor, and I also, I'm always really excited to get her feedback, even if it's a lot of work. It always is a lot of work because my first drafts are really messy, and so I'm always expecting like really, really big notes, and so the big note was just, we gotta
No.
no. But she was actually the one who came up with the idea. She said it's a game show, right? So there should be 10 episodes, like a season of TV, and that will also give you a really clear structure, because part of the like the difficulty in writing a book that has multiple paths is that because I'm letting you choose, you can go any which way, and then in the case of All This and More, sometimes you can go backwards if you don't like something you've chosen. And so it was so complicated to like make it all work. And it's even, no matter where you're going, if you're jumping sideways or backwards or forwards, there still has to be like a feeling of progression in the story and like a sense that you are getting to an end and there's going to be a price to pay and like something's got to give, you know? And so she said, let's make it 10 episodes. And so that way you know that you're counting down to like the big finale, and at which point all of Marcia's choices, wherever you end up in the finale, like that's going to be her real life, for better or worse. And I think that when she gave me that note, that really helped me take the book down from 700 pages to like a normal size book. And you know, we cut the choices a lot. I think you get to make about 10 choices maybe in the book to help decide Marcia's fate. But that, yeah, it was a big revision.
I can't, as I was reading your book, I was like, this was a doozy to write, but it works, it's amazing. I am not a fan of outlining, and I actually think the number of actual outliners out there is small. That's my anecdotal evidence. So I have the lay the track as the train is coming down it philosophy. And I think a lot of the world building happens from just being in a scene. And I'm very into concrete details. So like especially when you're working with something that's not real, you're like, okay, so they're gonna go back in time. What is it gonna feel like in the body? So very quickly I figured out some things. One, to go back in time, it makes you sick afterwards. Mm-hmm. And that just happened kind of naturally. Like I had a character do it and then throw up right away. And I was like, okay, but that was useful because then it would mean somebody wouldn't be time traveling constantly because they would have the flu afterwards. Pretty early on, I realized, so my characters realize they can go back in time to moments of their own past. It's not like a Back to the Future situation. They have to be alive during the moment, or maybe not. And so I wanted to make sure they weren't going back in time constantly to recent events. So on the fly, I decided, okay, it takes 2 years for the membrane that keeps the time to like thicken. So you can't go back in time for anything that's more recent than that. And that I found and helped me kind of shape the story. Once I had my editor, Dan, he was enormously helpful in me thinking further about the consequences of the time travel because I hadn't really taken it as far as I could take it in terms of you want to have these real world consequences. So being ill is great, but what else could happen? Are there things happening in a room when you time travel? If things get really powerful and somebody's very good at this time travel and people are witnessing her do it, is there a danger there? And that idea of real world danger really like ignited this book in a really fun way. But I had to rewrite my book so many times. I think a smarter person could have written it fewer times, but I only have this brain. So I think whenever you're building a world like that, at least for me, it just requires a lot of revision because I think it's Jane Smiley who says, it's not your job to judge your work, it's your job to understand it. So for me, revision is all about a process of understanding what is this book about and what is it trying to do and how does the time travel work? And maybe it takes me 7 years to understand. But that was my process.
And do you know how many drafts you did?
Oh.
I love a pretty sentence. So I have a lot of Barbie drafts, I call them, because they look great. But they cannot stand up. They just tip over. So I do a lot of rewriting as I go. So I probably did 3 substantial revisions. The biggest one being like almost like a lot of rewriting from page 1. But along the way, there were all these like...
Wait, so you're like polishing
It doesn't make any sense.
No, it doesn't. Oh my gosh.
Oh my God. But I
Like
can't-
polish it and then like cut the chapter.
I have to write in the order that I think a book should be read. Like I can't be like, I know what that scene is, let me write it. I'm too
interesting.
neurotic. I gotta write it that way. And I can't move forward if like the paragraph really bothers me. So I end up erasing a lot of terrific similes. But you gotta honor your process, right?
And do you know how many drafts you did for your book?
I'd say 4 big ones. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I just encourage everyone, for me, it was really interesting to read these books together. As I said, they're quite different but similar in terms of, just the mechanisms and the structure of these books. But one thing that I was struck by, a similarity, was that the time traveling, there's containers in a way, whether they're visible or not. In Eden, there's a membrane of sorts. In Pong, there's a bubble that kind of is constructed by quantum physics. But for me, I kind of experienced both of those containers as being almost what butterflies and chrysalis kind of figure into your book, but this kind of womb-like. And I just wonder if you could talk about that choice of something transformational. Like, were you kind of thinking about birth or transformation as you were thinking about time travel and how you were executing it on the page?
Me? Was I thinking about birth? No, I mean, no. I don't think. Well, that's why I looked at you. Because, no, I mean, well, because a lot of your book is about like motherhood and.
Yes, some might say that Time's Mouth, the title, could just be another word for vagina. You guys are going to remember this panel for the rest of your life. But I think I never said, and I did not set out to do that, but my book is a lot about motherhood, and I think I didn't intend this, but as I was writing these scenes of somebody tunneling or transporting as 2 different characters who can both have this gift, there was a lot of that imagery of, surfing through a tunnel. And at first, I don't think too hard about any of that stuff. I'm just sort of writing, and I let, as Flannery O'Connor says, the meaning kind of accumulate through the text. And then after a while, I was like, okay, I'm noticing it. It means something.
Yeah.
But I was playing with a lot of that imagery and that metaphor because I think there is this idea of central to the story is this notion of parenthood, or specifically motherhood, but fatherhood too, and the loss that is embedded in the role of parenthood. Like they're like, here's this beautiful or worm-like child, and you're gonna love it so hard, and if you do your job okay, obsolescence is built into the job. So your child is meant to leave you, and you only live with your child for a very small portion of their life. For such a strong relationship, you're really not day to day usually. Everybody's different, but that is such an intense idea to me that you're raising a child for them to leave you, and so that loss is so central to the book and is so central to our understanding of time also. Mm-hmm. So I think that's why that imagery was there before I fully understood it.
I also wonder if, because in your case you'd say tunnels, and in my case I'd say the bubble. Which is where it's like a bubbled section of reality where this game show is happening, and the characters in it are going back in time within this bubble. And I'm wondering if on some subconscious level we also did that. We made like smaller containers because I think it's easier to amplify the meaning and kind of make it more emotional in these little containers. Because if it's just like you said, they can't go back to moments where they weren't. And in my case, it's not the whole world that's jumping back in time with Marsh on this game show. It's like just her ex-husband, her daughter, and her best friend. It's only happening to these people. And I think that lets you really examine what these kind of choices would do, how it would affect not just the main character, but also the lives of who the main character loves. Because even without a quantum bubble, in our own lives, if you make a choice, a major choice, it's going to affect the people that you love. If you want to move across the country, or you want to have another kid, or you want to change jobs, that is going to change the lives of people you care about. And so I think when we shrink it down and we're just focusing on something that's happening in a tunnel or in a moment or in the bubble, it was just easier to really explore like the emotional impact that being able to go back in time to these previous moments would have on the characters.
Yeah, I definitely, well, just the emotions of guilt and regret and forgiveness are undercurrents in both your books. And I couldn't help but think about the 2022 movie, Everything, Everywhere, All at Once. And
Oh, I
because
love that. Yeah.
a mother-daughter relationship, you know, is at the heart of that movie, and how, yeah, just that what you were saying, Eden, that there are inherent limitations to parenting that probably can never be corrected on either side of the relationship. And I just thought it was interesting that both your books examine those limitations in a very real way.
It seems to me that the time travel stories that are the most successful are ones that they use time travel to animate something that has nothing to do with time travel. And a lot of times it is a familial or romantic relationship that needs to be repaired or reconnected. Like I'm thinking of Charles Yu's book, How to Live Safely in a Science Fictional Universe.
Yeah.
That's just a father-son story, really. Same with Interstellar, which I don't know if you could argue is time travel per se, but it really is a story about parenting. Kindred is a story about all kinds of things, but is also about a marriage. And I think without that piece, the time travel feels inert.
Yeah.
And yeah, Pong, if you could talk a little bit about the structure of your book, because for people who haven't read it, it is a choose your own adventure, but like as a reader and a writer, we were talking about it earlier, like I was thinking about Nabokov's Pale Fire, because he kind of sends you down a rabbit hole with his footnotes. And yeah, did you have like index cards on the wall? Or
Oh my
like,
gosh.
how did you do it?
I'm also not an outliner. I write, I think, was it E.L. Doctor who said it's like you're driving down a dark road or something and you can only see as far as the headlights, but you drive further and so the headlights. So that's also how I write, which was a very interesting way to write a book like this. So first of all, I tried to write, I've had people ask me, did you write one path of the story first and then go back and do the other ones? And I did not. I tried to write them all at the same time because I was worried that if I wrote one path completely through first, that there would be no way that it wouldn't feel like the right path, if that makes sense. And I want them all to be right because they are all versions of Marcia's life, and that's how we are too. We all, if we had just made different choices at certain times in our lives would be very different. There really is no one right way for our lives either. And so I wrote all the paths at once, and then to your question about the index cards, I did not have an outline or like a map or anything like that while I was writing it. I only made the map at the very end to give to my editor so that she did not just get the manuscript, see it, and then just like jump out the window. It's like, I had the map because I wanted to prove that it does all link up, it does make sense. This is how you get through it, don't pay.
You've received
Yeah.
your author's book. 1, jump out the window. 2,
Yeah.
get ready and edit.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, looking back, maybe I probably should have done it with an outline, I think. But I was just really worried, again, that if I started trying to map it out before I had written it, that it would start to feel kind of engineered, you know, because that is what I would be doing. I would be engineering the paths of Marcia's life, and that's not how any of us live our lives either. We have to make decisions in the moment based on our emotions, and what feels the most true. And so I thought if I can somehow hold all of the versions in my head without notes, that must mean that all of them are true for her, right? Because I won't forget them because they're authentic.
And Eden, once you've written several drafts, were you using any kind of visual aids for your different timelines and moving from character to character? It also is a lot to hold as a writer.
Yes, probably similarly, I should have and I did not. I tend to do, if we're going to get really nerdy about it, I'll write on my computer, I write directly on my computer, I listen to music, there we go.
What kind of music?
I listen to music with words.
Ooh.
I know. Controversial.
Controversial.
I did a little playlist on Powell's Bookstore's blog about the music I listened to while writing Time's Mouth, which I kind of can't listen to anymore because it was ruined by writing. But then when I'm done writing what I've written for the day, I will go to what I call my writing log, and I'll kind of write out what I wrote. And then I have a journal where I make like a storyboard. I guess it's kind of like reverse outlining is the term of what it's called now. I make a storyboard of what I've written, what came before that, what I think is going to happen next, and I put arrows, and that helps me kind of visualize how the pacing of the story, most of all, and what's going to lead to the next thing. But because each section, until a certain point, is sort of self-contained, I would just focus on that part, and it was easy for me to kind of keep it all in mind.
Well, one question I had, just like I said, these are very imaginative novels, and as a writer, do you feel like you're attracted to the wild and the weird? Like, is that something that you're that's where you'll find an opening in terms of discovering character, or is that your natural impulse?
Yeah, I think so. I don't know if you did. Did you do an MFA in creative writing? I did. Okay. I did an MFA at NYU, and I remember programs are getting better now. They're more genre inclusive, and they're starting to understand speculative fiction. But at the time I was there, I was trying to write, stuff that had science fictional and fantasy elements in it, and that's just what I like. So that's what I grew up reading. I started reading science fiction fantasy as a kid, so it's like my first love. It's where I feel at home. And then when I got to the MFA, I started reading a lot more literary fiction, gained an appreciation for it, and I feel like my style is kind of somewhere in between the two now. But so when I was in these workshops, I was writing, stories that were emotional and had complicated characters, but like also had magic in it, or also had people's shadows disappearing or something. And I do remember a professor once being like, "This is so good, but have you ever just thought about writing something normal?" And actually it was funny because he said it, and my first reaction was just shock, because I was like, honestly, no. I never have thought of that. I didn't even know I could do that. And it turns out I can't, because I think the books find you, and the books choose you, and I don't think, when you set out to write something if I tried to write something normal, I just don't think I could. But I think part of the appeal of science fiction and fantasy, or weird stuff, I just call it weird stuff, of weird stuff in books, is that we're reading because underneath it all, we're trying to understand the character, I think. We care about the characters, what they're going through, if they succeed, if they fail. We're trying to connect with the people. And I think sometimes if you add in a weird thing, it makes it almost easier to examine that the emotions that the characters are going through and the struggles they're having, because it just makes it suddenly unfamiliar in a way that I think opens your mind. And so, you're just, I just think it opens you up to just explore character and story more deeply than if it's a very familiar, recognizable world, recognizable situation.
I agree with that. I think I write just deeply character-driven stuff. I love story. I always say I'm a little bit of a plot hound, and so I can't have a story where like the dish breaks and someone looks out the window and the story's over. That's not appealing to me, but at the same time, I love prose. That's something that's a value for me as a reader and a writer, and I'm interested in characters. Philip Lopate, I teach him when I teach nonfiction, but he talks about when you're writing about the self, using the I. But I think this works for any character. They need to be at once specific and legible. So that's really important to me. One, that they feel like unique people that are real, that have their specificity, and also not so specific. Like everybody knows that indie movie that you start watching and you're like, this is not a real person. Like they wear a toaster on their head and they love salsa dancing. You're like, cute quirks, but who's real? So I am always trying to balance the specificity with the legibility of like, this is a real person. I will also say I come from what I consider kind of a weird place. I'm from Los Angeles. My parents are so weird, you guys. You would not believe the stories I would tell you. And so I come from LA, and it has a sort of a magic to it, but I think every place has a magic to it if you lift it up a little and look for the specificity. So what might seem kind of like normal to me is often not normal to other people. So I guess it's all relative. It's all context, right?
Yeah, and I had, in one of the interviews, you talked about that you kind of borrowed some aspects of your father for the character of Ray.
Yes.
In terms of his jobs. And
yes, so the book starts with Ursa, who starts the cult. She raises, it's an all-female cult, but her son is allowed to be there. And he escapes with another person from the cult, and they have a child in LA. And Ray a lot of him is based on my dad. My dad was a location manager, recently retired in the film industry, which means he finds locations to film. He's into something called Reichian therapy, which is a therapy where you go and gag yourself and scream into a pillow. And you can imagine having a dad like that is a struggle. But my dad is like far weirder than Ray. I mean, my dad was not raised by a cult, but he's got other things going on.
Wait, did your dad know that the character's based on him?
Yes, he loves it.
Okay, good.
He has like the biggest ego, and he is just thrilled. There's also a very positive relationship in the book between Ray and Opal, who's the protagonist, who also finds out she can time travel, that they are very connected.
He's such a great dad.
So he feels like it's us.
Oh.
I mean, in some ways it is. I can't time travel. But, so he's very happy about it.
This is good. In my second novel, The Cartographers, I didn't think of this at the time, but my father's name is David, and that you started talking about that it actually is your father in this book. So I named the main character's father David.
Without even thinking about it.
I just liked the name David Young. And if you've read The Cartographers, you'll know his name is not David Young, it's Daniel Young. But I named him David Young because I liked it, and my father's name is David. But then in the book, it just turns out that David Young is a terrible father. And then in like the second revision, I ended up like killing him in the first chapter. And I was like, oh no, I can't, like my father's gonna think, yeah. And so I changed it to Daniel, and then, because I was sure that my dad was still gonna be like, the father in this book, it's me, huh? What was I gonna say if his name was actually David? I'm like, no, it's not you. But it's really not.
My mother, I should have said this earlier, she likes me to publicly announce that she's a great mom and she did not abandon me.
Oh, it's good.
Well, I'll ask one more question, and then I'll turn it to you all. There are 2 microphones up here, so if you have a question, you can come forward and ask the question in the mic. And I think because you mentioned the MFA, I also went to NYU, and I know, Eden, you went to Iowa, but I wondered if there was a piece of advice that you would give to your pre-published self. Now, you both have published 3 books now in similar places in your career, and what would you tell yourself at the beginning, maybe post-graduation?
I think I would probably tell myself it's going to take longer than you think, and that one should always take the long view of probably anything, but particularly the writing life, which, has its ups and downs and takes a lot of work. And that the best thing about writing, I had from the very beginning, which is that you get to do it. And that doesn't change. And that, I think before I had any books out, I thought I would somehow be changed by having a book coming out. But in fact, you're the same person and you just have a book out. So I probably wouldn't have listened to myself, but I would have just told myself, keep writing and you're going to, just enjoy that.
Yeah, I love that. I'd probably say something similar. I think I would try to tell myself that writing is hard, but it's supposed to be hard. And I don't mean it in a bad way. I mean it in a good way. Writing is hard, but I think I worry that a lot of times at the beginning of a writing career, a writer might really be having trouble with their draft, or they have to set a book aside because it wasn't the one, they start a new one. And I think sometimes feeling that writing is hard, you can mistake that for like, oh, maybe I'm not a good writer, or maybe this isn't the book that I'm supposed to write, and you give up. But I think I would tell myself, writing is always hard. And it doesn't mean that you're not a good writer or that this is not the book. It just means this is exactly how it's supposed to be. Like writing is still just as hard now on the fourth book as it was on the first book, but I think that's kind of wonderful because it means that we're doing something meaningful.
Hi, thank you both for being here. Congratulations on the 700-page draft. I hope you saved it.
Thank you.
That's an accomplishment, public or not. My question is for both of you. Having written these types of stories, do you now wish that time travel eventually becomes a thing, or do you hope desperately that it does not?
Oh my gosh, no. I hope it does not.
Yeah, I think it's a cautionary tale.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think they both are.
Okay.
Yeah.
I guess it's my turn. This is a question for Peng specifically, but both of you can answer. So adding something weird or fantastical may reveal something about humanity in your writing that makes it interesting to you. But I also know from your books, there's also formal aspects, right? Multiple points of view, and then sort of choose your own adventure thing. Are there particular things about adding those formal aspects into storytelling that reveal story in a way to you that maybe having a single POV or an omniscient narrator wouldn't?
Yeah, I think it's funny because I never set out for all of these books. I've never set out to do, with the exception of All This and More. I did know that I wanted that to have multiple paths, but I don't ever consciously think about how many points of view am I going to have, or how are we going to jump back and forth in time. But I think it's just sort of a process of, as I'm going through the draft, I suddenly realize that like someone else is talking, or that we have to see from someone else, or we have to go back in time to see what happened 2 years before, and it's just it always feels like uncovering little secrets, and so I think it's whenever I realize that there's a secret there, that's how it gets pulled in. But it's really more of like an instinct thing than like a conscious decision. Yeah.
I love a good time travel story, so I am curious. Were you affected or inspired at all by any previous time travel stories that you have read, or did this just come whole cloth to your mind as you were deciding what to do? Because they do seem very unique ways of time travel of any that I've read before.
Once I start writing, I actually avoid anything that content-wise is similar, but I do look for structural help if I'm having issues. So before I started writing Time's Mouth, there were definitely, like I said, the Charles Yu book. I love Kindred, Octavia Butler's book. And then after, I teach at Caltech, so I sometimes try to find some science-y stories. And I love The Story of Your Life by Ted Chiang, which became Arrival. So that is a terrific story, and the time travel hinges on tense change. And I think that is one way that just to be so formal, it's formally simplistic and yet so complicated. So that was a real
Complicated, yes.
Yeah. I don't think I because I also do try to avoid books that I think might be too similar when I'm writing because I'm worried about absorbing the wrong thing. So I can actually say one book that I'm very glad I read after the draft, which was The Midnight Library by Matt Haig, because it's very similar. And I think if I had read that before, it would have been very confusing. I think his ends up a little more hopeful and optimistic at the end, and mine's sort of like it's like the darker version of The Midnight Library, the more cautionary tale of it. But but that's one I'm very glad to have read, but after.
Thank you.
Hello. I was just reflecting on what you guys were saying about like tying in people that you knew into some of your characters. And I had the question, like, I've noticed that when authors talk about, and like show creators and stuff, talk about how they came up for ideas with creators, like, or for their characters, that often the best and most believable characters happen to come from people they actually know, right? And I wonder, first of all, if it's on purpose that this happens, or it like just happens by chance, and second of all, if you agree that knowing someone, knowing their desires and stuff makes them a better and more believable character if they come from a real person.
Yeah. I mean, I think in my case, none of my characters come from real people. I had that funny thing with the dad name thing, but that was a total accident. But I think in general, my characters don't come from real people, but you can like borrow an emotion from somebody, and I think that's more of what it is. Because even if you were to draw inspiration from a real person, like a personality, the book just changes those characters so much, and it's their story, their book, and so by the end, it's really not the same person anymore usually. But yeah, I do think that sometimes feeling somebody's want, whether it's like somebody that you know or like someone from real life, sometimes that can help you, I don't know, like shape the character to start with, yeah.
Yeah, this experience was actually the first time I had done it so specifically, and it was mostly just taking some biographical elements because, like you're right, once I started writing Ray, he's just so different from my dad in all these ways. I do think a lot of what I draw upon is often very personal, but it's not autobiographical. So, I have this character named Cherry in the book who's Ray's partner. She's Opal's mother. They're escaping this cult, and I had to write about what it would feel like to have lived only in the woods of Santa Cruz and then come to LA in 1980, what that would feel like. And I had never experienced that, but I was kind of drawing upon my experiences moving to a new place, or the immigrants that I know, what it was like for them, kind of just coming to a totally new, basically would feel like a new planet. Yeah. And then trying to transfer some of my own personal feelings into that character. But I think it's not a direct relationship.
Yeah, I think it's more it's like the emotional, the heart of it is the interesting and compelling thing, not necessarily the window dressing of like the plot or like specific events. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Do either of you have like a favorite like type of time travel to read or watch? Like, there's many different like time travel like ways that each book goes about it. Do you have a favorite way that a book goes about it?
A favorite device or something?
I've got like a favorite trope, I guess, which is where someone goes back in time to like a very emotional moment, like they, the last moment that their mother was alive, and they could do something that would eventually save her or change something, but they don't, because that would change everything else too, I think that's my favorite because it's so, I don't know, I think it's just such a poignant thing to go back and to know that you have the power to change something, but then you don't
take it
because it's not right,
This is where you reveal me as a fraud. That I don't read, my knowledge of the time travel genre pales, and like people who read time travel are like, they're into time travel. And I had this situation when I wrote my first book, California. I had certain books that were touchstones for me, but I was not a post-apocalyptic reader. And I actually think my naivete is what made me write one, and then I siloed myself away from them to write the book, and it was only till later I had to come educate myself. What's your favorite?
I enjoy the time travel where anything you do in the past doesn't like actually change things, but like you were always meant to time
Oh,
travel.
I like that too.
Ooh, that's
Yeah.
good. I like that one.
Yeah.
I'm gonna steal that.
Thank
next time.
Thank you.
So we just have about 5 minutes left, so I'm actually just going to ask the last concluding questions. I'm sorry we're not able to get to the last two.
Come to our signing,
Yeah,
and we'll
so-
answer them there.
Yeah, before I ask the questions, just a reminder that their books are for sale, and they will be signing books directly after this session. And as a dedicated festival goer, one of the very best things is to buy the author's book, have them sign it, and say hello. So I hope you'll all do that. So because we're in a room of readers, I just wanted to ask, what is the book that made you a reader?
Oh, wow. Book that made us a reader, book that made us a writer.
Well, that will come next.
Oh, that's the next one.
I mean, I wanted to be a writer my whole life. I never wanted anything else. And that's because I just love to read. My mother and I together were and are huge readers. So I can't point to one book because I can't remember. I learned to read so early that I can't remember a pre-literate time. But I mean, of course, there were like, if we're going back like to Judy Blume novels or to Ella Montgomery, like I read every single book Ella Montgomery wrote when I was in the 4th grade. I like became obsessed with like tracking down her entire catalog. Shout out to all the librarians who helped me with that one. So that my love of reading is really, I would say I want to be a writer, but I was not a person who was, there's always those people who are writing novels, usually a fantasy novel in high school. There's probably somebody in this room who's like, yeah, I didn't write books, I just read them and planned to write one day.
One day. I don't know. I mean, I don't know if I remember the first one. I remember reading the entire Goosebumps library. There's like 5,000
There's
of
so
them.
many.
I read them all. Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess my next question was, like, was there that one book or author that kind of unlocked, like, yes, I want to do this? As you both said, like, being a writer is a huge sacrifice and commitment. And what was that book that really just gave you that energy?
I've got one.
Well,
Do you want to go?
I was just going to say, when I read The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood in college, I think for me, that book unlocked so many things for me. One, the idea that you could be kind of like genre omnivorous. So I tend to read mostly realism, but a lot of the books that I love most of all do something else, that other strange thing. And so that was one of the first books that I read like that. And I also really loved her language play in that book. I was so moved by it. And before that, I had been writing mostly poetry. And so that was when I really committed to the life that I'd always dreamed for myself, was reading that book.
So mine's a really random one. It's a very old science fiction novel, I think from like the 60s or 70s or something, called Perchance, The Chronicles of Elswen by Michael Kurland. And we were on a family vacation going to the Caribbean. I think I was like 9 or something. And you stop in Puerto Rico to change planes. And I went into the bookstore there and was just looking for something to read as a 9-year-old. And the only English book in the store was that book. But also, I don't even know if it was for sale because there was like no price tag on it and it was kind of like shoved behind the shelf.
Is this a magical story?
Oh, it is. Actually, this is a really magical story. Okay, so I like pull this, and it's like dusty and like warped and I was like, well, okay, this is in English. The picture on the front is wild, so I'm gonna get this. So I took it up to the counter and the guy's like, I don't know, $5, like, I don't know what this is. And so I started it on the plane, and by the time the plane landed, I had finished it and turned to my mom and was like, I want to write a book like this. It was about parallel universe. It's about a girl who can hop parallel universes, but she can't control it, and then people are after her. And so that, but the part that gets magical is I loved this book because it was the reason that I wanted to start writing and not just reading. But, and like I said, it's a book about a girl who can jump parallel universes but can't control it. And over the years, it has disappeared and reappeared on me in ways that like don't make any sense. So like I know that I packed it when we moved when I was 10, and then when we got to the new house, it was not there. But then like 5 years later, it was on my shelf, which is not possible. And like every time I talk about this book, I go home and it's either like not or is there again, and then I just have to wait for it to show up again. So I'm gonna go home now and be like I know exactly where it is. If it's not there,
I want it
like,
to come floating down right now.
it's just like up here right there. It's like, wait.
That's really cool.
Yeah, I love this book so much. Yeah.
Well, that's all the time we have. Thank you to both our authors.
Thank you, Kurt.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Great question.
Thank you.